Hello friend, welcome to Nighttime Horror. On this channel, we post the most fascinating and scariest stories told by real people. Make sure you like, subscribe, and watch till the end. Let's get started. The silence of still water. I had never believed in ghosts. Not really, anyway. Sure, I'd heard the usual campfire stories, seen all the horror movies, but I always figured there was a logical explanation for the bumps in the night, the flickering lights, and the strange noises in old houses. That was until I spent the summer in Stillwater. Stillwater was a small, almost forgotten town nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. My family had a cabin there that we used as a vacation home when I was a kid. After my parents passed away, the cabin sat empty for years. I didn't visit much, too many memories of my childhood, too much quiet. But when my job started to feel like a dead end and my relationship fell apart, I figured some time alone in the mountains might help me reset. So, on a cloudy June afternoon, I packed up my car and made the 4-hour drive to Stillwater. The road twisted through dense forests, and as the trees closed in, I started to remember why I hadn't been back in so long. The air was heavy, the kind of stillness that feels unnatural, as if the entire town was holding its breath. I hadn't been to the cabin in almost a decade, but it was just as I remembered, nestled by a small lake, surrounded by woods that seemed to stretch on forever. The cabin was rustic, with creaky wooden floors and old furniture, but it was cozy enough. The first couple of days were peaceful. I spent my time reading, hiking, and trying to clear my head. I slept with the windows open, letting the cool mountain air drift in at night, accompanied by the sound of crickets and the occasional call of an owl. It felt like a retreat from everything. That peace didn't last long. It started on the third night. I was lying in bed, drifting between sleep and wakefulness, when I heard a noise outside. At first, I thought it was just an animal, a deer, or maybe a raccoon. But then I heard it again. This time, it was closer. A soft rustling, like something moving through the underbrush just beyond the tree line. I told myself it was nothing, but my heart started pounding, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching me. I lay there, listening, but the sound eventually faded, and after a while, I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I shook it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. I spent the day exploring the woods, wandering farther than I had before. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. It wasn't just the absence of people, it was the absence of sound. No birds, no insects, just silence. I told myself it was because of the time of year, but deep down, it made me uneasy. As I walked, I found something odd, an old, crumbling stone foundation, hidden beneath the undergrowth. There was no sign of a house or structure, just the remains of what looked like a basement, the stones worn smooth by time. I figured it was from an old homestead, long since abandoned, but as I stood there, staring at it, I felt an overwhelming sense of wrongness, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I left quickly, not wanting to linger any longer than necessary. That night, the noise came back, but this time it wasn't just outside. I woke to the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, pacing back and forth on the porch. My pulse raced as I strained to listen, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't an animal. It was too rhythmic, too precise. I lay frozen in bed, barely breathing, waiting for the sound to go away. But it didn't. After what felt like hours, the footsteps finally stopped. I told myself it had to be my imagination, but the fear gnawed at me. I wasn't sleeping much after that. I kept hearing things, knocks on the walls, whispers just outside the window, always too quiet to make out, but too loud to ignore. The silence in the woods had shifted, becoming something oppressive, something malevolent. It was as if the forest itself was hiding something, watching me. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the lake, I noticed something in the distance. On the far side of the lake, just barely visible through the trees, was a figure. It was too far away to see clearly, but I could make out its shape, tall and moving, just standing there, watching. My heart leapt into my throat. I blinked, and it was gone, just like that. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. Someone or something was out there. I convinced myself to stay one more night. Maybe it was just a local, curious about the cabin. I tried to ignore the gnawing anxiety that something far worse was lurking in those woods. That night, however, I could no longer dismiss it. I had locked all the doors, pulled the curtains tight, and double-checked the windows before going to bed. But in the dead of night, the footsteps returned heavier this time, and they didn't stay on the porch. They moved to the front door, then to the side, then back again, as if circling the cabin. I heard the faint creak of wood as something pressed against the walls, almost like it was testing the structure, seeing how strong it was. I gripped the flashlight under my pillow, every muscle in my body tense, waiting. The footsteps stopped again, and the silence that followed was worse. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath. Then, suddenly, there was a knock, just one, soft but deliberate, on the bedroom window. I turned slowly, heart pounding in my ears, and I saw it, a face. Pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to absorb the darkness. It was staring right at me through the gap in the curtains. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the face vanished, swallowed by the night. I bolted out of bed, grabbed my keys, and ran for the door. I didn't care what was out there anymore, I just needed to leave. I flung open the door, sprinted to my car, and slammed the door behind me. The engine roared to life, and I sped down the narrow road, not daring to look back. As I drove, the fog seemed thicker, almost alive, swirling around the car as I raced through the winding mountain roads. My heart was pounding, hands shaking on the wheel. I could still feel those hollow eyes on me, even though I was miles away from the cabin. Then, just as I was nearing the highway, the car sputtered. The headlights flickered. I slammed on the brakes, heart in my throat. The car stalled out, the engine going silent. I was surrounded by trees, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I tried to restart the car, but the engine refused to turn over. Panic clawed at me as I fumbled for my phone, no signal. And then, I heard it, footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming from the woods. I locked the doors, but I knew it wouldn't matter. The sound drew closer, slow and steady, crunching on the gravel of the roadside. I could feel it, that same overwhelming sense of wrongness, the same oppressive silence. My breath caught in my throat as the footsteps stopped right outside the car. For a moment, everything was still. And then, something pressed against the window, just a light touch, like a hand running across the glass. I didn't dare turn my head. I didn't want to see what was there, but I could feel it watching me. I don't remember how long I sat there, paralyzed, waiting for something to happen. Eventually, the footsteps retreated back into the woods, and the oppressive silence lifted. I managed to start the car and drove without stopping until I reached the highway. I never went back to Stillwater after that night. I don't know what was out there in those woods, and I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the wind is still, I swear I can hear those footsteps soft, deliberate, pacing just outside.